I'm Damon on WJOP Radio, 96.3 FM. And our guest right now is David Yang. He is the artistic director for the Newburyport Chamber Music Festival. And David, good morning and welcome back.
Good morning, Win. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure to have you today. And you're a busy guy, and you come around Newburyport a couple of times a year, if not more, right?
Well, a couple times a year, that's about right, yeah.
And every time you come around, you have to work.
Yeah, but it's, what do they call, what's that expression? Journeyman's holiday?
Busman's holiday.
Busman's holiday,
yeah. So, and let's see if I have the instrument right. It's the viola?
It's the viola.
Oh,
right.
Look at that.
Yeah. I mean, this whole concept of playing music for a living is still, after all these years, after decades of doing it, it's a little, sometimes I just wonder about it. It's a little strange to me that I'm doing something which I really, I mean, I'd be doing this for free, except that people are paying me for it, or at least most of the time they're paying me for it.
Well, it is a nice thing. And it's the Newburyport Chamber Music Festival, and you have a concert at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Newburyport.
We do. We have a concert this Sunday at 4 o'clock, and it's the Newburyport Festival Baroque Orchestra, led once again, as we did last year, by Nurit Pacht, the American-Israeli violinist.
Oh, okay. I don't know much about him, but you certainly do.
Sure. Well, Nurit, she's amazing. What can you say? She's kind of a multiple threat. She also does a lot of contemporary music, and most recently was on tour for a brief tour last year with Philip Glass for a series of recitals. Just her on violin and Philip Glass on piano playing his own music.
Oh, wow.
I mean, Philip Glass is kind of, I think you could say, a classical superstar, household name at this point.
Okay.
But she's also an incredible Baroque violinist. And Baroque being, we're talking about music from the 1600s and 1700s.
Okay.
The Baroque period. After Baroque, there was classical, and then there's a Romantic period, and then 20th century, actually.
Okay. All right. And now, when I think of Baroque, I think of the harpsichord.
Right, harpsichord. Well, okay, so
I'm off, huh?
No, you're right. That harpsichord would be the standard kind of bass section.
Like the guitar.
Well, actually, it'd be more like in a rock band, the role of the kind of the drum and the bass, the drums and the bass. So kind of the rhythm section. All right, we'd call it
the heartbeat. Yeah.
But in this case, for this concert, we're doing something quite unusual. Instead of having a harpsichord, as we did for the winter concert last year, we're having a theorbo. So, yeah, I was wondering how many people out there know what a theorbo is. So the theorbo is a member of the lute family. And the lute, of course, well, not of course, some of you might know, is the precursor of the guitar. So it's originally a Middle Eastern instrument from Northern Africa. Kind of looks like a guitar, but has a big round body. But the theorbo is the huge big brother of the lute family. So the instrument, imagine a guitar that is literally 7 feet long. So that's what a theorbo is. It's the neck is so long. They have to. It's a kind of strange way that they play it, but they hold it in their lap. They usually need they have to have a car to drive around with this thing.
So it kind of sounds like I want to say a mandolin. A big mandolin.
It looks kind of like a mandolin. It doesn't have double strings like the mandolin does.
Okay.
But yeah, imagine a massive mandolin out there. So that's our kind of rhythm section, and then we've got 4 violinists with Nurit leading. I'm playing viola, and then we have a cellist. And as a cellist, I'll say that this is my personal shout out. My daughter Eliana is coming up again, who I think she was here last summer and played on this show.
She was our first live musician here on the morning show.
So Eliana is coming up. She's coming up from, she's at Juilliard all day tomorrow, and she comes up, gets in at night, and she'll be playing. And 4 violinists, a couple of familiar names to those of you who follow the festival. So again, Nurit Pacht is coming back, And then there's Yuri Namkung and Yona Zur, who were both violinists at the festival last summer, and they'll be here too. And then Douglas Freundlich is the theorbo player. And we're doing kind of, I guess you could kind of call it greatest hits of the Baroque as last year, although it's a different program from last year. So we have some music by Vivaldi, some by Bach, by Handel, and then as a special treat, if people are still around, we have maybe we have an encore planned for people.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So there's a sense with Baroque music, people think of Baroque music and Vivaldi and the Four Seasons. It's like, oh yeah, that's nice. It's kind of, that's soothing. I like listening to that, which it is. I mean, it's wonderful. It's amazing music. But what I think people don't quite realize, just because they've become so used to the sound, in some ways, these composers, especially Vivaldi, were so good at what they did that they don't realize how radical this music was in its day. Just like if you listen to, oh gosh, all right, I'm going to be out of my element here, but you think of kind of the pioneers of rock. Did you say Chuck Berry?
Okay, yeah. Back in the late 50s.
Back in the late 50s and early 60s. Maybe even the Beatles, right? Some of the late Beatles work and stuff. Maybe. Again, I'm straying into territory here. Maybe I shouldn't go into.
I understand the Chuck Berry had really a very solid beat to it. And you repeat it over and over and over again.
Right, and a new sound, because I think up until then, a lot of the music was written by someone else, and they'd kind of come in and it was kind of maybe a little more soothing, and think of some of the music from during World War II, and then these guys would come in just burning up the stage, and running around and twisting and just making sounds that people had never heard before. And we hear that now, a lot of this music, it's like, oh yeah, classic rock. And it's like, we kind of take it for granted. But back then, there are these parents saying, what are our kids listening to in this awful stuff? And it's gonna corrode their minds, and just like comic books are gonna corrupt the youth of America.
Turn that off. But there was no electricity.
Right. But it's very much the same way. Vivaldi was in particular was a real pioneer, and someone like Bach, he actually wrote the rules that we now take for granted for much of classical music. The fugue. He was the guy who really determined exactly this is how you write a fugue. Vivaldi doing crazy things, imitating the sound of dogs barking in the Four Seasons. Imitating birds and animals, and certain parts of the music where, he'd even write in, this should be played in an ugly manner. This wasn't the way music had been before. Music had been primarily either Renaissance music, a lot of vocal music, and music of the church. So, masses and religious music, ecclesiastical music. And then you have this fiery red-haired priest from Venice, Vivaldi, coming in and really unsettling things, stirring things up, and also the instruments changing at this time, and the modern violin really reaching its peak. In fact, some would say we haven't been able to match it since then. Stradivari and Amati and these great makers. So these guys would write this music, and it was crazy stuff back then. And again, I think it's a testament to how good it was that we kind of take it for granted now. It's lasted through the ages. And I think one of the great things about Nurit is that she's the kind of musician, she's kind of a rock star in her own way, won all these amazing awards and tours the world and concertos all over. And she's a player who can bring Baroque music back to its roots, and really in the roots in terms of really electrifying music. So it sounds, you go to a concert and you see her play, and all of a sudden it's like you've never heard this music before. So I mean, she really, people come out of concerts of hers and they're just like, wow, I can't believe that. I've heard this piece 1,000 times. I've heard it in elevators, and I never heard it like that. And not that she's doing just crazy things just for the sake of being crazy, but just in terms of incredible energy and just musically keeping us as musicians trying to follow her really on our toes, because you never know exactly what's going to come out, but every time she does something, it makes sense at the same time.
Huh. Okay. Now, for those who haven't caught up with David before, he's the artistic director for the Newburyport Chamber Music Festival, but you also are at the University of Pennsylvania, too. You know this stuff.
That's right. So I'm director of chamber music at the University of Pennsylvania down in Philadelphia. So I live in Philly. I'm not a local, but I like to think of Newburyport as somewhat of an adopted home for me.
Oh, yeah. Well, you've been here for a while now.
Yeah, well, I've been coming here since the early 90s.
Okay.
And probably first time I was probably 1990, I was up here visiting a friend. And the story of the festival is my friend Michael Graff, who's an architect in town. And I'd come up all the time, and then we had wives, and then we had families. And I started thinking, well, maybe I could come up and maybe there could be some reason, practical, professional reason to come up. And I was running a chamber music series in Philadelphia at the time, and I thought, it doesn't look like there's any chamber music festival up here. I mean, I knew there's Gloucester, Rockport Festival down in Gloucester, and then there was Portland up in Maine. But then there was this huge geographical gap. So, I started asking around. I asked Michael who he thought I could talk to, and he said, why don't you talk to so-and-so? So I called one person, and she was like, well, yeah, I'm not really interested. And so I was like, well, if anyone else you think I could talk to? She said, yeah, why don't you call so-and-so? So I called another person, and another person was like, well, yeah, I don't know. Why don't you talk to this other person? So I got bounced around a few times until I wound up talking to Jane Niebling.
Okay.
And Jane, I made the pitch to her. I remember her on the phone, and she was like, well, okay, let's do it. And there we go, 17 years later. It's kind of crazy to think about.
How about that? Well, it's like the Beatles. They got turned down by a bunch of record companies before somebody took a chance.
Right.
And did it.
I think I'd say it's a kind of general lesson in life, for me at least, that, out of every 10 projects I maybe try to get off the ground, probably 9 of them wind up being non-starters before they're even out of the hangar. And then one of them will fly. Mm-hmm. And you've got to be willing to take those hits. People saying no until one person says, well, okay, and then you've got something there.
Yeah, and then you build off of that one. So
right.
You got 17 years going with the Chamber Music Festival in Newburyport. We're going to try something very. Very cutting edge for us anyway. We had a little bit of music that you wanted to play. Vivaldi, was it?
Sure. So the program, specifically the program on Sundays, we're doing the Vivaldi Concerto for 4 Violins. We're doing the Bach A minor violin concerto. We're doing a Handel Concerto Grosso and another Vivaldi piece. And then we're going to end with the Bach Air on a G string, which I think... if people don't know the name, that once it starts playing in the concert, they'll be like, oh, this is this, and they'll kind of settle into their seats. But we start out with this concerto for 4 violins by Vivaldi, and we have a recording of it, not of the Newburyport Festival Baroque Orchestra, but by the great Italian orchestra L'Armonico.
Okay, so let's give it a shot here on WJOP Radio 96.3 FM. how about that?
So that's Vivaldi's Concerto for 4 violins in B minor. Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about Baroque music and the Baroque era in general was the world was really changing back then. It was becoming much smaller. There was a massive amount of exploration around the world. Whole parts of the, not even just the continent, actually, the globe, which had previously been just either completely unknown or just rumored, were opening up. I mean, Vivaldi, let's see, when was Vivaldi born? He was 1678 and died in 1741. So you think of this period, North America, they knew about North America, but they just kind of, they touched on the coasts and the Caribbean and, this meetings between various civilizations, indigenous peoples, which of course usually didn't work out too well for the indigenous people. But scientific discoveries, Galileo and the universe, the microscope at this time. So not only looking far, but looking near, the discovery of bacteria and, cells. I mean, the idea of looking at your drinking water at the local pond and then seeing that every time you take a gulp, you're taking hundreds of microorganisms down, little animals, art and just art and science. This was a crazy time, and I think a large part of it was the idea of the individual and this understanding that maybe we're not. I don't know, how do you put this? We're not just an animal, but we're all very, very different. And of course, religion was also going through large, major changes in Europe at this time. So this is reflected in the music for the first time. Again, this is where the first concept of the virtuoso came up. And again, Vivaldi was a violin virtuoso. Corelli, another well-known violinist from the time, was a violin virtuoso. And this idea of someone coming up and doing extraordinary things, which push the limits of the instrument. Again, celebrating the individual in that sense. And this is when the concerto first developed, originally called the Concerto Grosso. And the way the form works is there's an orchestra, so there's a group of people playing, and then there's an individual playing who sometimes plays with the orchestra and sometimes is completely on their own.
Solo.
Yeah. And there's a sense of a kind of fight between the two of them. So you'll have the solo play and then the orchestra play and then the solo play and the orchestra play, and back and forth and trying to kind of conquer each other, and the soloist kind of blooming through the large, massive sound. And the way it originally came up is you'd have kind of ensemble solo players, and that's, you get this Concerto Grosso form. And that's what much of the music, not all of the music, basically all of the music we're doing they're all concertos, but some of them are Concerto Grossos and some of them are just concertos. So Concerto Grossos, we have this Handel piece and also all the Vivaldi pieces where you'll see an individual play, or maybe two individuals play, or even three, and then everyone will come in at the same time, and there's this back and forth, kind of a call and response almost. So it's an incredibly dynamic and exciting form that also reflects very much the period. And it went on and turned into something, I won't say something different, but it wound up taking on heroic proportions, another 100 or 150 years later, where you get the massive concertos of Brahms and Beethoven in the 19th century.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, now it's all kind of blending together.
Yeah, I mean, classical music is a continuum. The most extreme examples of concertos. You think of Rachmaninoff, second piano concerto, where you've got this huge instrument that's 9 feet long, fighting, an orchestra of 120 people with trombones and tubas and all the low brass and 30 violins. But you definitely see that in the music of the Baroque period. That's where it all began, pretty much.
So it went Baroque to classical.
Right.
Okay.
And then Romantic, and then late
Berry.
Romantic, and then then you get Courtag and Crumb after that.
Hey, talking about violinists, we had Charlie Daniels in Amesbury this summer. He makes all different types of sounds with that machine, doesn't he?
Yeah. I mean, the violin can do pretty much anything the voice can do, and it's interesting, this whole idea of imitating the voice. I mean, that's where many people know vibrato is this kind of shaking sound that we make, kind of wobbling the pitch on the violin. And that basically sprung up as a way of imitating the human voice when it's singing.
Oh.
A certain kind of quavering.
Huh.
And what's interesting, actually, the actual instruments that we have in many cases they're not just Baroque designed, but specific instruments we have were designed and built in the Baroque era. So my viola, for instance, the one that I'm playing, was made by a German maker named Johannes Thielke, and it was the actual viola that I play on was made in 1670.
Really? Is that the one that you'll have in Newburyport?
That's the one I have in Newburyport.
Oh, wow.
And my daughter's cello was made by Joseph Panormo, an Italian who'd moved to London, part of the whole Panormo clan, which kind of founded the English school of violin making. And hers states it's a little later than Baroque, but it's still been around a while. It goes to 1810, actually.
Now, before we got on the air, you were talking about you work with somebody who can tell these violins and violas and cellos all apart.
Right, yeah, that's just an incredible thing. My friend of mine, Phil Cass, and his whole profession is to identify instruments by various clues, artistic and craftsmanship clues. And he's got a photographic memory. Very few people I've met who have that. And it's quite useful in his profession. So you'll hand him an instrument. Actually, it's crazy. You'll take just imagine, you take a violin out of its case, and from across the room, he'll look at it and he'll say, oh, that looks like it might be a Biziac. And I mean, for me, it's someone who's not at all an expert in the actual provenance of the instruments. To me, I look at one violin, I'm like, oh, that's pretty. That's a nice violin. And the idea of being able to tell between one maker and another from 1722, it just blows my mind just a little bit.
Yeah. Now, where do you find instruments that are that old? They can't just be lying around.
No, there are specialized dealers who sell these. And they can set you back a pretty penny. In my daughter's case, she actually has a patron who's bought the instrument and owns it as an investment, because in fact they're very, very savvy investments if you can afford it. They don't go down in price, I have to say, unless something happens to them, of course. Yeah. And there aren't more old violins being made.
That's right. How do you get a new antique? It doesn't happen.
That said, there are fantastic makers building instruments today. They're called luthiers. It's written as luthier. And you can get, how do I put this? The very, very, very greatest instruments are, by and large, these older instruments. People have pretty much all heard of Stradivarius and maybe Guarneri del Gesù. But there are fantastic instruments being made today in this year. Mm-hmm. So I'd say certainly the best instruments being made today are a lot better any day of the week than a crappy instrument that's 300 years old. And there are instruments, just because it's old, that doesn't make it good.
Yeah.
But the really great ones that are old, those, I don't know, they don't know if it's something that happens to the wood or because of the actual wood that they used, or the varnish, or the rumors that Stradivarius might have even mixed blood or other bodily fluids into his varnish, and the idea of the varnish affecting the sound. So, I don't want to say that it would be a disservice to the luthiers of today to say that you can only get great instruments from the past, because there are great instruments in the present. But there's definitely something special that I can pick up. I can pick up a viola, and there's a way that an old instrument will feel that new instruments don't feel, and it's amazing.
Yeah. Well, I know. I hear a story of there was an actress years ago. She had her legs insured because that was her trademark.
Okay.
I'm sure you've got all that covered too.
I don't have my legs insured. No. But yes, there have been. I think maybe Glenn Gould might have had his hands insured.
I think I did read about that. Yeah.
But you imagine, this is your profession, and this is what you do, and you're making incredibly fine adjustments. I think anyone who's played an instrument realizes that there's some instruments that are easier than others. Certainly, you can sit down at the piano and you can just play a note, and on a guitar it's got frets. You can pluck a string and play a pitch, but to really master the art of playing an instrument, it's a deeply human thing, and also deeply satisfying. Mm-hmm. I'd say for me, I try to shy clear of the word perfection, but certainly striving for excellence in everything that I do.
Mm-hmm. That certainly makes sense. And people are going to hear that excellence coming up on Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock at St. Paul's Church on High Street in Newburyport.
Right, and the website is newburyportchambermusic.org.
So it's the Newburyport Chamber Music Festival Baroque Concert, Wednesday or Sunday.
Winter concert, the one winter concert of the year.
Yeah. Now, last time you were around, I think, didn't you have a trio or a quartet that you were performing with?
I did. That was in November. That was late fall.
Okay.
And Ensemble Epomeo was up here, violin, viola, and cello. And that was our last concert after 10 years, or 9 or 10 years. The trio was based in England, so there was a bit of a commute. The violinist was originally coming from Vienna. So we had a cellist in England, violinist in Vienna, and then me in Philadelphia. Philly.
Sounds kind of plain.
So yeah, that was great. It's a bit of an end of an era.
Yeah. So when you have groups like that, because the Chamber Music Festival is kind of the same thing, people come from all over. They practice the music on their own, and then when they get together, then they can add that little certain touch to it.
Right. Well, yeah, that group was a little different because it was a regular group, so we'd go on 4 or 5 tours a year, and we'd rehearse for a few weeks, and then we'd start doing concerts, and then we wouldn't see each other for 2 months, and then we'd see each other again.
Yeah.
Whereas one of the nice things about the festival, and that's deeply gratifying to me in a certain way, because you can really get OCD about what you're trying to do. But there's a whole different aspect to concerts that we do as part of the festival in this sense, like in the summer and for this concert, where, yes, everyone's coming in having practiced their part. And then you sit down and, yeah, as you say, that's where the sparks can fly and things happen that you might not expect because you haven't had time to really control what you're doing, and you have to put things together fairly quickly. But they, of course, you have to be really tight and also good.
Yeah.
So, for instance, we're coming in, and these are all pros, and we've all played these pieces before, and we know them. But the musicians get in on Saturday night. That's tomorrow, I think, right?
Yeah, tomorrow night.
And we start rehearsing in the morning on Sunday, and we just go through. We've got about 7 or 8 hours of rehearsal, and then a short little break, and then boom, then there's the concert.
Yeah.
So it's kind of on the edge of the seat for us as well in that sense, but it's in a good way. It's exciting.
All right, so that's tomorrow afternoon or Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock at St. Paul's Church on High Street in Newburyport. And you play in the sanctuary?
We'll be playing in the main church. We'll be rehearsing in the morning in the chapel.
Yeah.
I think they've got services or something
on
like
Sunday,
that.
Yeah,
In church,
they
right.
should, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's neat. We've touched upon a lot of things, David. Anything that you'd like to talk about before you?
I think that about covers it. We have the festival has a spring concert coming up in April, and I'm pleased to say that we're bringing it used to be annual, and it's been out for a couple of years, bringing our annual piano recital back. And we have Anna Stoicheva, the great Bulgarian pianist, coming in. And one of the exciting things about this concert in April of next year is this collaboration we have with the wonderful local piano teacher, Penny Lazarus. And we work, or Anna, the pianist each year, when they come, works closely with her, gives some master classes and teaching for her students, but the students actually have a very active role in choosing the program which the pianist plays. I think they've chosen some Rachmaninoff preludes and maybe some other stuff. And then Penny designs the curriculum that her students study in her studio for the year based on the program which the pianist will be playing. So starting in September, they wind up focusing on maybe Russian music or Hungarian music or this or that. So it's kind of a very deeply embedded outreach program there, working with these students. I think there are about 15 or 20 of them that Penny has. And then they're doing research on the music, but they're also following the music of the pianist, in this case, again, Anna Stoicheva. And then they meet her, and they work with her, this person that they've kind of seen from afar, this star pianist or star musician.
Yeah.
And my impression from Penny and from the kind of the happy smiles from the students that I've seen is that it's a pretty amazing experience for all of them. And a whole range, I think, going up, in some cases, very small, maybe 6 or 7 years old, all the way up till graduating seniors in high school.
How about that? Well, that's important for it. If a student can play that stuff, and they're looking to get into music in school, that's a great recital piece, isn't it?
I think so.
All right. Well, David, thank you for joining us and sharing all your information and interesting, I think, really interesting stories.
Wynn, thank you so much for having me.
All right. David Yang, the artistic director for the Newburyport Chamber Music Festival. And again, the Winter Baroque Concert is going to be taking place on Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock at St. Paul's Church in Newburyport. All right. Thank you very much. And we'll take a look at the news coming along just a couple of minutes here on WJOP Radio 96.3 FM.